The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle's inner courtyard as Prince William made his way toward the state apartments. It was a Tuesday in late September, and the Prince of Wales had arrived early for what should have been a routine briefing about upcoming royal engagements. The autumn air carried a crisp edge that reminded him of his childhood days spent running through these same corridors, though today's responsibilities weighed far heavier than any childhood games. As William approached the grand entrance to the state apartments, he noticed something that made him pause mid-stride. Corporal James Mitchell, one of the Queen's Guards stationed at the ceremonial post, was swaying slightly on his feet. The young guardsman, resplendent in his traditional red tunic and bearskin hat, appeared to be struggling to maintain the rigid posture required of his position. His usually pristine uniform showed subtle signs of distress, a slight tremor in his white-gloved hands, and an almost imperceptible lean to the left. William's trained eye, honed by years of military service and countless ceremonial events, immediately recognized the signs. The guard was unwell, possibly on the verge of fainting, yet was clearly attempting to maintain his post despite his obvious discomfort. In the strict hierarchy of royal protocol, guards were expected to remain motionless and silent regardless of personal circumstances, a tradition that had been maintained for centuries. Most members of the royal family might have simply continued past, trusting that the guard's superiors would handle any issues. After all, the Queen's Guard were among the most disciplined soldiers in the British Army, trained to endure extreme conditions while maintaining their ceremonial duties. However, William's military background and genuine concern for the welfare of those who served made him acutely aware of the human cost of such rigid traditions. Without hesitation, William changed direction and walked directly toward Corporal Mitchell. The guard's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he realized the Prince of Wales was approaching him, though his training prevented him from acknowledging the royal presence in any visible way. William could see beads of perspiration forming on the young man's forehead despite the cool morning air, and the slight pallor of his complexion confirmed the prince's suspicions about his condition. "Corporal," William said quietly, his voice carrying just enough authority to cut through the morning stillness without drawing unnecessary attention from other palace staff moving about their duties. "Step back from your post." The command was simple, direct, and completely unprecedented. Guards were not dismissed from their ceremonial duties by members of the royal family. Such matters were strictly the purview of military commanders and senior palace officials. Corporal Mitchell's training warred with his surprise as he processed this unusual instruction from one of the most senior members of the royal family. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, neither man moved. The weight of centuries of protocol seemed to hang in the air between them, while the practical reality of a soldier in distress demanded immediate action. William could see the internal struggle playing out behind the guard's disciplined exterior, the conflict between following royal command and adhering to military procedure. "I said step back, Corporal," William repeated, his tone remaining calm but carrying an unmistakable note of gentle authority. "That's an order from your future king." The words seemed to break through whatever hesitation remained. Corporal Mitchell took a careful step backward from his ceremonial position, his movement precise despite his obvious physical distress. The moment his boots left their designated marks on the stone floor, William stepped forward and placed a steady hand on the young man's arm. "When did you last eat?" William asked, his voice now carrying the warm concern of someone who had served alongside soldiers and understood their challenges. "And don't give me a regulation answer. When did you actually last have a proper meal?" The question clearly caught Corporal Mitchell off guard. Members of the royal family simply didn't engage in such personal conversations with guards, and certainly not about their eating habits or personal welfare. The young soldier's composure, already strained by his physical condition, seemed to waver under this unexpected show of genuine human concern. "Yesterday evening, Your Royal Highness," Mitchell replied quietly, his voice barely above a whisper as he struggled to maintain both his military bearing and his dignity in this unprecedented situation. "I've been on duty since midnight, sir." William's expression darkened with concern and what appeared to be anger, though it was clearly not directed at the young guard. A duty shift of nearly 10 hours without food, combined with the physical demands of maintaining a rigid ceremonial posture, would challenge even the fittest soldier. The prince's jaw tightened as he processed this information, his military training and leadership experience telling him exactly how dangerous such conditions could become. "Right," William said decisively, his tone shifting into what anyone who had served under him would recognize as his command voice. "You're going to sit down right here, and someone is going to bring you something to eat and drink. No arguments." The courtyard around them had begun to stir with the activity of other palace staff and security personnel going about their morning routines, but none had yet noticed the unusual scene unfolding near the state apartment's entrance. William guided the unsteady guard to a nearby stone bench that sat in the shade of an ancient oak tree, its weathered surface worn smooth by centuries of use. As Corporal Mitchell sat down, the relief on his face was immediately apparent. The rigid posture required of ceremonial guards put enormous strain on the body under normal circumstances, and his weakened condition had made the ordeal nearly unbearable. William remained standing beside him, his presence serving as both protection and support for the young soldier who had clearly been suffering in silence. "Stay here," William instructed firmly. "I'm going to sort this out properly." With that declaration, the Prince of Wales turned and strode purposefully toward the palace entrance, his bearing suggesting that someone was about to receive a very direct conversation about the welfare of the guards under their command. The morning had taken an unexpected turn, and what had begun as a routine approach to a scheduled meeting had evolved into something that would challenge long-standing traditions and protocols in ways no one could have anticipated. Corporal Mitchell remained seated on the ancient bench, his mind racing as he tried to process what had just occurred. Never in his military training had anyone prepared him for the possibility that a member of the royal family would personally intervene in his welfare, dismissing him from his post and personally ensuring his care. The young guard found himself caught between gratitude for the prince's genuine concern and anxiety about the potential consequences of abandoning his ceremonial duties, regardless of who had given the order. The morning sun continued its steady climb across the clear September sky, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the courtyard as the day's events continued to unfold in ways that no one present could have predicted. William's footsteps echoed decisively through the marble corridors of Windsor Castle as he made his way toward the administrative offices where he knew he would find the senior palace officials responsible for guard duties and ceremonial protocols. His military bearing was unmistakable as he moved through the ornate hallways, past portraits of generations of monarchs who had walked these same paths, each carrying their own burdens of leadership and responsibility. The Prince of Wales found exactly who he was looking for in the palace marshal's office. Colonel, sir, a distinguished military officer whose responsibility included overseeing the ceremonial guards and ensuring the smooth operation of palace security protocols. The colonel was reviewing duty rosters when William entered without ceremony, his usual diplomatic pleasantries notably absent. "Colonel," William began without preamble, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. "I need to know why Corporal Mitchell has been on duty for 10 hours without food, and I need to know right now." Colonel rose immediately from behind his mahogany desk, his military training evident in his crisp movement and respectful posture. However, the surprise on his weathered face was clearly visible as he processed the prince's unexpected presence and the nature of his inquiry. Such direct intervention in operational matters by members of the royal family was virtually unprecedented. "Your Royal Highness," the colonel began carefully, "I'm not immediately familiar with the specific circumstances you're referencing. Perhaps if you could provide more context about the situation." "The context," William interrupted, his patience clearly running thin, "is that I just found one of your guards barely able to stand at his post because he hasn't eaten since yesterday evening. He's been maintaining ceremonial position since midnight, which any military officer worth his commission would recognize as dangerous and unacceptable." The colonel's expression shifted from surprise to concern as he quickly moved to consult the duty roster spread across his desk. His fingers traced through the carefully organized schedules and assignments, searching for the information that would explain how such a situation had occurred. The silence in the room stretched taut as William waited for answers. "Sir," Colonel said after a moment, his voice betraying his growing unease, "it appears there was a miscommunication regarding shift changes. Corporal Mitchell was scheduled to be relieved at 6 this morning, but his replacement was reassigned to additional security duties for an unexpected diplomatic arrival. The message regarding extended duty apparently failed to include provisions for meal breaks. William's expression darkened considerably at this explanation. His years of military service had taught him that such miscommunications were often symptomatic of deeper systemic problems, and the welfare of soldiers should never be sacrificed for administrative convenience, regardless of the circumstances. "So you're telling me," William said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that because of poor communication and inadequate planning, a soldier under your command has been placed in a potentially dangerous situation. And this happened without anyone checking on his welfare or ensuring basic provisions were made for his needs." The colonel's discomfort was now plainly visible as he realized the severity of both the operational failure and its discovery by the Prince of Wales himself. Years of distinguished military service had taught him to take responsibility for the actions of those under his command, but explaining such a failure to a member of the royal family presented challenges he had never anticipated. "Your Royal Highness, I take full responsibility for this oversight," Colonel replied formally. "The failure in communication and planning is ultimately my responsibility, and I will ensure immediate measures are taken to prevent any recurrence of such circumstances." "That's a start," William acknowledged, though his tone remained stern. "But right now, I'm more concerned about the immediate situation. Corporal Mitchell is sitting on a bench in the courtyard because he was about to collapse at his post. He needs food, water, and proper rest before he's fit to return to any duties." Without waiting for a response, William continued with the rapid-fire efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis management. "I want you to personally ensure that he receives proper care, and I want a full review of duty roster procedures to prevent this from happening again. Additionally, I want to meet with whoever was responsible for the communication failure that led to this situation." Colonel nodded briskly, already reaching for his phone to begin implementing the prince's instructions. "Immediately, sir. I'll have medical personnel check on Corporal Mitchell, and I'll personally ensure he receives proper meals and rest. The procedural review will begin today." "Good," William said, though his expression remained serious. "And Colonel, I want to be clear about something. The men and women who serve in these ceremonial positions are soldiers, not ornaments. They deserve the same consideration for their welfare and safety that we would provide to any service member in any other role." The weight of these words settled heavily in the ornate office, surrounded by centuries of military tradition and protocol. William's statement represented more than just concern for a single guard. It was a fundamental challenge to assumptions about how ceremonial duties should be conducted and how the human cost of maintaining royal traditions should be balanced against the welfare of those who served. As the colonel began making the necessary phone calls to address the immediate crisis, William found himself reflecting on the broader implications of what had just occurred. His intervention had been instinctive, driven by genuine concern for a soldier in distress, but he was beginning to realize that his actions might have consequences far beyond simply helping one young guard. The palace operated according to carefully established protocols that had been refined over generations, each procedure serving multiple purposes of security, tradition, and ceremony. By directly intervening in military matters and questioning established practices, William had potentially opened a much larger conversation about how royal traditions should evolve to reflect modern understanding of leadership and responsibility. Meanwhile, word of the prince's unusual intervention was beginning to spread through the palace staff with the speed that characterizes all institutions where routine is suddenly disrupted by unexpected events. Kitchen staff were already preparing food for Corporal Mitchell, medical personnel were being summoned to check on his condition, and senior administrators were beginning to realize that they might need to answer difficult questions about procedures they had long taken for granted. Back in the courtyard, Corporal Mitchell remained seated on the stone bench, still processing the extraordinary turn his morning had taken. Other guards and palace staff were beginning to take notice of his unusual situation, though the respect for royal authority meant that no one questioned the arrangement that had been made. The young soldier found himself at the center of an evolving situation that was attracting attention at the highest levels of palace administration. The September morning continued to unfold with an energy and purpose that no one had anticipated when the day began, and it was becoming clear that the consequences of William's intervention would extend far beyond the immediate care of one unwell guard. Within 30 minutes of William's intervention, The courtyard had transformed into a hub of carefully orchestrated activity. Medical personnel arrived with quiet efficiency, conducting a discreet but thorough assessment of Corporal Mitchell's condition, while palace staff appeared with a proper meal and refreshments. The young guard, still somewhat bewildered by the attention he was receiving, found himself being treated with a level of care and consideration that was completely outside his normal experience of palace life. Dr. Sarah, the palace's chief medical officer, completed her examination and confirmed what William had suspected from the beginning. Corporal Mitchell was suffering from dehydration and low blood sugar, conditions that could have led to serious consequences if he had continued his duties without intervention. Her report, which would soon make its way to the highest levels of palace administration, documented not just the guard's condition, but the circumstances that had led to it. As word of the incident spread through the palace's complex hierarchy, reactions began to emerge that revealed just how unprecedented William's actions had been. Senior courtiers, many of whom had spent decades navigating the intricate protocols of royal life, found themselves grappling with questions they had never been forced to consider. The Prince of Wales had not simply helped a soldier in distress. He had fundamentally challenged assumptions about the relationship between royal traditions and human welfare. Lord Chamberlain, sir, whose office held ultimate responsibility for the organization of the royal household, received the news while reviewing preparations for an upcoming state visit. The distinguished administrator, who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, immediately recognized that the situation extended far beyond a single incident of poor scheduling. The prince's intervention represented a philosophical challenge to established practices that would require careful consideration and response. "This is unprecedented," Sir murmured to his deputy as they reviewed the initial reports. "His Royal Highness has essentially initiated a review of protocols that have been in place for generations. The implications could be far-reaching." Meanwhile, in the Queen's private study, news of the morning's events was being carefully presented to Her Majesty by her private secretary. The monarch, whose long reign had seen countless examples of tradition adapting to changing times, listened with the thoughtful attention she brought to all matters concerning the welfare of those who served the crown. Her response, when it came, was characteristically measured but telling. "The Prince of Wales acted with compassion and good judgment," the Queen said simply. "If our traditions place unreasonable burdens on those who serve us, then perhaps it is time to examine whether those traditions serve their intended purpose." This royal endorsement, subtle but unmistakable, sent ripples throughout the palace hierarchy. Staff members who might have viewed William's intervention as an overreach of protocol suddenly found themselves reconsidering their positions. The Queen's support transformed what could have been seen as a breach of etiquette into an opportunity for meaningful reform. Back in the courtyard, Corporal Mitchell was slowly recovering his strength under the watchful care of medical staff and the surprisingly attentive presence of palace personnel who seemed genuinely concerned for his welfare. The young soldier, who had begun his shift expecting nothing more than hours of silent ceremony, found himself at the center of a situation that was attracting attention from the highest levels of the royal household. William returned to check on the guard's progress, bringing with him Colonel and several other senior military officials. The prince's presence transformed the informal gathering into something resembling an impromptu command meeting, with various officials reporting on the steps being taken to address both the immediate situation and the broader issues it had revealed. "How are you feeling, Corporal?" William asked directly, his approach as straightforward and personal as it had been during their initial encounter. The question, simple though it was, represented a level of direct royal engagement with individual service members that was rarely seen outside of formal ceremonies or official visits. "Much better, sir, thank you," Mitchell replied, his voice stronger than it had been earlier but still carrying the uncertainty of someone navigating completely unfamiliar territory. "I'm grateful for your intervention, Your Royal Highness." William nodded, then turned to address the assembled officials. "I want to understand how we prevent this from happening again. Not just the scheduling problems, but the underlying assumption that ceremonial duties somehow exempt us from basic considerations of human welfare." The discussion that followed would later be remembered as a turning point in how the royal household approached the balance between tradition and responsibility. William's questions were direct and challenging, forcing officials to examine practices they had long accepted without question. Why were guards expected to maintain positions for extended periods without adequate breaks? How were medical emergencies to be handled during ceremonial duties? What provisions existed for ensuring the basic welfare of personnel during lengthy assignments? Colonel, still clearly uncomfortable with the scrutiny his department was receiving, nonetheless began to outline potential reforms that could address the prince's concerns while maintaining the dignity and effectiveness of ceremonial functions. His suggestions included mandatory welfare checks during extended duties, clearer communication protocols for schedule changes, and regular medical assessments for personnel assigned to demanding ceremonial positions. "These are good starts," William acknowledged, "but I want to see a comprehensive review. Every aspect of how we manage ceremonial duties needs to be examined through the lens of ensuring the welfare and safety of the people who serve in these roles." As the impromptu meeting continued, other members of the royal household began to arrive, drawn by reports of the unusual gathering in the courtyard. Princess Anne, known for her own direct approach to dealing with practical matters, appeared and quickly grasped the significance of what was taking place. Her presence added another voice to the growing consensus that meaningful change was both necessary and overdue. The conversation gradually evolved from crisis management into strategic planning, with various officials beginning to outline how proposed reforms might be implemented without compromising the essential functions of royal ceremonies and security. What had begun as William's instinctive response to one guard's distress was transforming into a systematic examination of practices that affected hundreds of people who served the royal household in various capacities. Corporal Mitchell, now feeling significantly better but still processing the extraordinary turn his day had taken, found himself being consulted about his experiences and opinions in ways that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. His insights, delivered with the honesty of someone who had actually experienced the challenges being discussed, provided valuable perspective on how theoretical policies translated into practical reality for the individuals they affected. As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the courtyard, it became clear that the morning's incident had catalyzed something much larger than anyone had initially anticipated. The Prince of Wales had not simply helped one soldier. He had initiated a fundamental re-examination of how royal traditions could be maintained, while ensuring genuine care for the people who made them possible. 3 weeks after the incident in the courtyard, the full scope of changes William's intervention had triggered became apparent throughout Windsor Castle and the broader royal household. The comprehensive review he had demanded had evolved into the most significant examination of ceremonial protocols in decades, with implications that extended far beyond the original concern for guard welfare. The Mitchell reforms, as they quickly became known among palace staff, introduced fundamental changes to how ceremonial duties were managed across all royal residences. New protocols required mandatory breaks every 4 hours for guards in ceremonial positions, with dedicated relief personnel ensuring continuous coverage. Medical officers were assigned to all major ceremonial events, and clear communication chains were established to prevent the scheduling failures that had originally put Corporal Mitchell at risk. Perhaps most significantly, William had insisted on creating formal channels for personnel to report concerns about their duties without fear of disciplinary action. This represented a cultural shift that acknowledged the importance of individual welfare within the context of institutional service, a balance that had often been weighted heavily toward tradition and protocol at the expense of human considerations. The changes attracted attention far beyond the palace walls. Military leaders, veterans organizations, and workplace safety advocates praised the reforms as a model for how traditional institutions could evolve to reflect modern understanding of leadership responsibility. The story of a future king personally intervening to protect a soldier's welfare resonated with public sentiment and enhanced William's reputation as a leader who genuinely understood and cared about the people who served under his future reign. Corporal Mitchell found his life transformed in ways he could never have anticipated. Rather than facing disciplinary action for abandoning his post, he became something of a symbol for the positive changes taking place within the royal household. His honest testimony during the review process had provided valuable insights that helped shape the new protocols, and his continued service demonstrated that challenging existing practices could lead to meaningful improvements rather than punishment. The young guard was eventually promoted to sergeant and assigned to train new personnel in the reformed protocols, a role that allowed him to ensure that future guards would never face the dangerous conditions he had experienced. His story became part of the training curriculum, illustrating how proper communication, adequate support, and genuine concern for personnel welfare could enhance rather than diminish the effectiveness of ceremonial duties. William's intervention also had broader implications for his role as heir to the throne. Royal historians noted that his actions demonstrated a leadership style that combined respect for tradition with practical concern for the people affected by those traditions. The incident became a defining moment that illustrated his approach to future kingship, one that would honor the past while adapting to contemporary understanding of responsibility and care. The Queen's response to the entire situation further reinforced the positive nature of the changes. During a private audience with senior military officials, she specifically commended the reforms and expressed pride in her grandson's leadership. Her public statements about the importance of caring for those who serve the crown were widely interpreted as strong endorsement of William's actions and the changes they had initiated. The monarchy has always evolved to serve the needs of each generation, the Queen observed during a speech to military leaders several months later. Our traditions are valuable precisely because they connect us to our history, but they must never become barriers to treating people with dignity and consideration. Recent changes to our ceremonial protocols exemplify how we can honor our past while meeting our present responsibilities. Colonel, initially uncomfortable with the scrutiny his department had received, eventually became one of the strongest advocates for the new protocols. His military experience helped him recognize that the reforms actually enhanced operational effectiveness by ensuring that personnel remained healthy and alert during their duties. The comprehensive nature of the changes also eliminated many of the communication problems and scheduling conflicts that had previously created unnecessary stress and potential safety issues. The ripple effects of the reforms extended to other aspects of royal operations as well. Staff working conditions throughout the royal household were reviewed and improved, with particular attention paid to situations where traditional practices might create unnecessary hardship for employees. The principle that had driven the original intervention, that people should not suffer for the sake of maintaining traditions, became a guiding philosophy for operational decisions across the royal establishment. International attention to the reforms was also significant. Other monarchies and ceremonial institutions around the world studied the British royal household's changes as a potential model for their own operations. The story of a future king personally intervening to protect a guard's welfare became a powerful example of leadership that transcended national boundaries and resonated with people who valued both tradition and compassion. Corporal Mitchell, now Sergeant Mitchell, often reflected on the morning that changed not just his own life, but the entire culture of service within the royal household. The young man who had struggled to maintain his post while feeling increasingly unwell had become an inadvertent catalyst for changes that would affect thousands of people who served the crown in various capacities. His relationship with Prince William evolved into one of mutual respect, with the future king occasionally consulting him on matters related to guard welfare and ceremonial operations. This ongoing connection illustrated how the initial incident had created lasting relationships based on shared commitment to ensuring that service to the crown remained both meaningful and sustainable for the people who provided it. The story of that September morning at Windsor Castle became part of royal history, remembered not as a crisis or controversy, but as an example of how individual acts of compassion and leadership could create positive change within even the most traditional institutions. William's immediate response to a guard's distress had demonstrated that true respect for tradition included ensuring that the people who maintained those traditions were treated with dignity and care. As the reforms became fully integrated into royal operations, their success was measured not just in improved working conditions, but in the enhanced morale and effectiveness of personnel throughout the royal household. The principle that had motivated William's original intervention, that human welfare must never be sacrificed for ceremony, had become a cornerstone of how the modern monarchy balanced respect for the past with responsibility for the present. The legacy of that morning would continue to influence royal operations for years to come, serving as a reminder that the greatest traditions are those that adapt to serve human needs while maintaining their essential purpose and dignity. The future king had shown that leadership sometimes requires challenging established practices, and that true strength lies in the willingness to put people before protocol when circumstances demand compassionate action.